woodpeckers, so let's do a little quick ID before we jump into the next topic. So, starting from lower left, now you know what this is. Flicker, correct. The two on the top are the ones that are difficult to tell apart because we have them both and they occur in sort of the same places and they have very similar calls. Common though.
Hairy or downy?
Both. So the left is the hairy and the right is the downy. And there are slight differences in their appearance, but honestly, you would have to almost have them in hand to see it. A hairy's bill is just bigger, longer, stouter, longer in relation to the width of the head than a downy's is.
Can you run by which or which again?
Okay, sorry. So this is hairy, this is downy.
Oh, okay.
This is bigger, taller than this guy. The bill, when you look at it in relation to this, and then you look at this relation to the head, so that's bigger.
But don't they have a little red on them somewhere?
Oh, they both do, sorry, yeah. So they both, this is just showing a male, and that happens to be, we can't see, but both of these species, the males have red on the back of the head, and the females don't. But that's not gonna help you tell the species apart. You can go a little bit by habitat. Downies tend to be where there's a deciduous tree component in the forest, so for us that's usually aspen. Whereas hairies can be just out in the coniferous forest in general. And as I said, their calls are different, but the best way to tune into that is to, if you've got some sort of vocalization aid that you use, whether it's, I almost brought my cassette tapes and then I realized no one even has a cassette player anymore. I had a great cassette series of birding by ear, and what was interesting about it is that it grouped birds that sounded alike together. So it didn't, this, you know, is just, this is Cornell's Birds of North America, and it's just done by taxonomic order again. So you'll hear something on disc number 4 that sounds a lot like something on disc number 1, but you can't go back and forth. Whereas these cassettes I had did that for you. They grouped, okay, robin, tanager, grosbeak. They all sound alike, right? So how do you really tell them apart? That was great, but that's a cassette tape, so no one uses that anymore. But now, of course, you don't even need these because you've got your smartphone and you've got apps on your notebook or your smartphone. And I have one that I have finally learned how to use that's Cornell's, what's it called? It's not eBird, it's something like that, though. What is yours?
Mine's the Rocky Mountain Wildlife that has a whole bird section.
Oh.
And it has all the calls.
Yeah. So mine will pull up and it'll have a picture and it'll have a call and it'll have a song and yeah. One thing I would suggest is not the best way to use that is to go out and just play things randomly in the woods because that actually, again, is interfering with the stuff that's actually out there. You know, you're going to get some bird all worked up that there's some new male in the neighborhood and I got to go defend against him and all that kind of stuff. That's not, but if you hear something and you want to confirm it, you know, that's a good way to bring up the vocalization. But not to use it to elicit calls, that's sort of frowned upon.
So my problem is that I'll hear this owl, then I'll hear this owl, and I don't know one owl from another.
Mm-hmm.
So is there some resource where I could repeat the sound of the owl and it'll tell me what owl it is?
You know, I think there are. You mean if you were to record it?
Or even just, yeah, somehow, yeah.
Like SoundHound where you can just
Yeah.
put your phone on to listen
Yeah,
and then it
I,
tells
you know, I think there is. I don't remember the details. You could look for that on the web, but I know there's something like that that is sound recognition, and it will give you some suggestions of what that could be. I'm sure that technology is there.
Because like
I'm
the
not
bird
familiar.
I showed you,
Yeah.
you know?
Right, yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah. Okay, and we didn't finish the lower right. Woodpecker, sapsucker, you know, they're all the same family. That's a red-naped sapsucker, which is migratory in our neck of the woods. So they've been coming back. They're kind of noisy. They're sort of going around the neighborhood, chattering and drumming. They like to drum on like metal, you know, and that nice noise. But cavity nesters, all of them are cavity nesters. All of them can make their own cavities.
Why would they like to tap on metal? Just
I don't know, there's something about the way that sounds to them, they like that. Now, you can tell these birds apart by their drumming, if you get really good at it. And usually, like I know my app will have their drumming call as well, but I think there's some pretty subtle differences in drumming. And if they don't have a great recording of it, but in drumming, you're listening to more the cadence of it, and how quick is it, and does it drop at the end, or does it end with like 2 notes, or, you know, all this stuff that you would have to really listen to each one. We were talking about corvids a little bit earlier, about how smart they can be. Someone was talking about, who was talking about Richard? Was talking about ravens in Fairbanks, or somewhere like that. So this group of birds, which is ravens and crows and magpies and jays, is collectively called corvids. I don't know what that word means, but that's just how they're referred to. So again, if we start from top left, so the 2 on the top, ravens and crows, confusing for people, and rightfully so. They're just big and black, make similar noises. Again, just like those 2 woodpeckers, there's subtle differences. Ravens are bigger. Ravens' beak is heavier. They partition themselves out in habitat just like most animals do. So crows tend to be closer to human development. Ravens can be, but are also the ones that you'll see way out. You know, their habitat could include wilderness where nobody is, you know, whereas crows don't tend to be in that environment. When they fly, that's the best way to tell. If they don't call for you, which is a good way to tell, when they fly, a raven's tail is what's called wedge shaped, so it kind of has a bulge and then it goes out. And a crow's tail is just the typical sort of straight across tail. Steller's jay, which is our blue jay, you know, in the west, even though now we're getting eastern blue jays here as well. If you have feeders, you might have had an eastern blue jay for feeder this winter. A couple people did around town. But the Steller's jay is our western jay, and magpies, of course. And then what's the one on the left? Clark's nutcracker. Okay, these are all corvids, members of the corvid family, all birds that we have around here. Your curriculum talked about important bird areas, so I'm supposed to mention it. We do have an important bird area in our region. So important bird area is a program that occurs worldwide, and there's different levels of how an area is rated. You nominate an area to be an important bird area. There's some board that sits somewhere out of nowhere, and they determine whether or not they're going to accept it into the important bird area program. And there are all sorts of criteria for acceptance, and it usually depends on, it supports some huge number of colonial nesting birds, or it's got all these different ways of assessing the value. And it might be important at a regional level, it might be important at a state level, it might be important at a continent level, and it might be important globally. Okay, so Cascade Reservoir is a state of Idaho important bird area. And that's the closest one to us. And the reason it is because it is the largest nesting colony of western grebes in the state of Idaho. It's the 3rd largest bald eagle nesting concentration in Idaho. And then, of course, it's got migration happening, you know, because it's water level fluctuating, the mud flats are exposed in late summer, you have shorebird migration coming through, so it's got a lot. And it's got hundreds and hundreds of ducks nesting around Cascade. I don't know how many of you have the opportunity to get out on Cascade. I mean, it's not the kind of place that I would typically go because it's so developed and, you know, algal blooms and all sorts of stuff. But actually in the spring, it's a really cool place. Before the boat traffic comes and the summer traffic comes and wild birds are moving through, and yeah, there's just amazing numbers of ducks. So if you get out on a canoe or something like that, a lot of the shoreline is closed off beginning in February for nesting season. The Bureau of Rec manages that immediate shoreline, and they actually close
So where do you access typically?
I go out on a boat.
But where do you?
Various places,
Sugarloaf.
Sugarloaf is one, on the other side,
Just the camp,
what's it called? Poison Creek, or, Trotter Cup, which is either side, or I'll go way down south to Campbell's, you know, yeah. But it's a neat area, a lot of fun. So, you can actually adopt an IBA, and quite honestly, it's been a while since I've been involved in this program, and so I don't remember what it was that they liked people to do, but I assume it is some sort of censusing of maybe one species or all species, or some sort of systematic look at it every once in a while, checking in, are there risks, are there threats, you know, what's going on, that kind of stuff. Because our land around it is managed by the federal government, I think there's less of an opportunity to do some things that happen at other IBAs, but who knows? I bet the possibilities are endless. If as a chapter, you wanted to adopt the IBA. And I'm not advocating that you do, I'm just saying it's an opportunity. Okay, so now we're gonna get into how do we actually study birds. Because as master naturalist, the idea is that you're getting some background and introduction to things so that you can actually go out and help do these things. And you probably already have. I know some of you already have. Marjorie was just talking about the short-eared owl survey she was doing as a volunteer this winter. You know, so there are opportunities out there, and so we were assuming that you guys would be the most knowledgeable and the most skilled to help when these opportunities come up because you have this background. That's the whole purpose of master naturalist, right? So you need to know how we do things with birds, because let's say I decided that I wanted to have a volunteer effort to do something with birds. For example, last year was an on year for monitoring bald eagles. So bald eagles are no longer listed under the Endangered Species Act, but part of the delisting process is that you continue to monitor on some sort of schedule for 20 years after they're removed from the list to make sure that that was the right decision. And with bald eagles, you monitor every 5 years in that 20-year period. So last year was a 5th year. And so that means we want to know what's going on with every bald eagle nest in the state of Idaho. And that's a lot, a bald eagle nest. It's a lot even in this region for me to try to do. So, perfect opportunity. I had a training. Who wants to be a volunteer eagle nest monitor for the season? You had a set season. You had to make X number of visits to your nest within this period of time. I didn't care when you did it, as long as you did it. You needed to know X, Y, and Z and be able to report back to me on what happened with that nest. And that all got compiled at the state level. So, yeah, I don't know how many master naturalists had a bald eagle nest, quite a few. Yeah. And then a lot of local residents too, because it's a fun thing to do. It's not difficult, it's stationary, they're usually pretty accessible. You can do it with your kids, they're big, you can see them, you can find them, so it was a perfect kind of thing.
Some of the nests were near hot springs.
That's why you never saw a bald eagle. So, I'm kidding, she did find it. There's, depending on your question, there's lots of different ways you can go at monitoring birds. The bald eagle nest would be probably the most simplistic, where you're just doing a simple observation. You're not trying to get at numbers because you already know where your nests are. That information's given to you, right? All you want to know is, was this nest successful and how many young did they produce? So you get at that with just some simple observation. There's really no other technique that would give you that information other than putting a camera up or something like that. But observation, that's a great way to get information, and it's the appropriate method in some situations. But there are lots of others, and it all depends on your question. And they can get quite complicated, and you have to get a statistician involved in designing a project that will give you the answer you want reliably. So some of the things we talk about, a census, anybody know what that means? A census means that you count every individual within your defined study area. That's really hard to do, most times. unless you have, like you want to know how many nests are in this cormorant colony on this island, right? You would do a census then, because you can walk onto that island and you can systematically walk so that you count every nest, and maybe you would mark them somehow to know that you've already counted that one. You get the full number, and that's a census. Many times we can't do that. If the question is how many yellow warblers are in Ponderosa State Park, we wouldn't be able to walk every inch of Ponderosa State Park and come up with a number, right? That's just not possible. And it's not logistically efficient. So then we move into the sampling realm of things, where we're doing a survey and we're sampling a segment of the population, and if we do it right, and we ask the right question, we can extrapolate the information to a larger space. That's what that's all about. So within the sampling realm, with birds, we can do point counts, which means it's kind of what you did with your short-eared owl thing. You had a transect probably, but you
We had a
stopped.
started point, and then we would do every half mile, and I think we had 10 points or something.
Okay, so
it's
that in a
time-
sense, that was a point count, even though it was established along quote-unquote a transect.
Yeah.
So a point count is a stationary place that you go and you stop, and for some period of time you do whatever it is you're doing, whether it's listening or watching or combination of those two, and it's systematic. You do it the same way every time, and everybody else who's working on that same project is doing it the exact same way. And point counts can be random on the landscape. They can be a random start point and then some sort of systematic thing, which is usually the most efficient way to do it. They can be in a grid pattern, endless designs. But what the idea is that you go there multiple times and you stay for the exact same amount of time and you record what you detect. The Breeding Birds Survey that folks may have heard of, which is a national bird monitoring effort that's been going on since the 60s, I think. It's the longest term data set we have on birds in North America. It's a volunteer effort, and it's a point count based thing, where you go and you count for 3 minutes, and then you move on to your next point. And you do it at the same time, the same 2-week period in June every year. So you're standardizing, you're getting rid of some of the variation by doing it the same way. That's what's important, because you don't want to end up with data that's got a bunch of noise in it because you went on a different time of year, when the birds aren't doing the same thing, or not all the birds are here, those kinds of things. A transect is another way of censusing, and you can, like a point, you can establish random places out in the landscape where you're walking along a transect. Usually that's a virtual transect, like you don't actually have a string in the woods that you're following. You have a start point and a compass bearing, and you're walking. And then you're not stopping along the way, you are walking the whole way, and usually you have some width around you that you're looking or listening, and you're counting everything in there. So it's kind of a combination of a census on a transect, because oftentimes the assumption is you can't miss anything that's within this certain range of your transect, right? Or you can do distance sampling. Is that on there too? Yeah. And this is a different kind of line transect sampling where you are allowed to miss birds. The assumption is you're not going to see everything along your transect, because that's really hard. But you are estimating a distance of everything from your line as you walk along. Oh, that robin's 20 meters away. You write that down. Oh, that sparrow is 5. Blah, blah, blah. Write that down. You do that, get a lot of data, run it through some fancy statistical program, and it will spit out a number that says, based on what you saw, we think your probability of detection is such and such. So we're going to apply that to your whole transect, and here's your estimate of your population. It's not, it's more complicated than that, but that's basically what it's all about. Or you can do things like playback surveys. And I talked a little bit earlier how it's just not accepted that we go out and just broadcast stuff all over the place. But in some instances, certain birds And especially at night, when you're not seeing